What up, though? This Chef, man. It's a quick video. It's a little show in Detroit. Come on at night, weeknights and Saturdays, I believe. But nevertheless, they tackling a subject that I think everybody need to be aware of. You know, like when the police be pulling people over and shit and falsely accusing them of shit, and motherfucker might end up going to jail for some years like this young man did. This young guy went to jail when he was like 14 years old for a crime he didn't even commit. He spent 10 years of his life in jail. But take a look, you'll hear the details. But like, subscribe, and comment at the bottom.
Time to let it rip on the panel right now. A woman has been called a civil rights super lawyer. Whether she's fighting for clean water in Flint or helping the innocent in court, Julie Hurwitz is always on the front lines, and so is the longtime TV reporter turned investigator and founder of the nonprofit Seeking Justice, Bill Proctor, and as always, anchor attorney Charlie Langton. Now, earlier tonight, I was told that Devonte Sanford would be here. And in fact, I've received some third-party confirmation that he's on the way via Uber. I hope he makes it. But even if he doesn't, we have some people who've certainly done their best to defend the rights of the innocent. And we want to start with Julie Hurwitz. And this entire case, this case that I think sparked Chief James Craig to today say that he would vow to get innocent men and women out of prison. He said this.
Let's say there's someone who was wrongfully convicted, and that person is released, and we identify the responsible suspect. What if that suspect is also responsible for other crimes, other murders? And so we get to close even more cases.
But when you think about what happened to Devonte Sanford, nearly a decade in prison for a crime he did not commit, why did it take so long, Julie?
You're going to have to ask the Detroit Police Department and the Wayne County Prosecutor's Office that question, because they knew from day one that Devonte was not the man who committed this crime. They got a confession from the actual murderer within weeks of Devonte's conviction, and they knew that, and still know to this day, who actually committed this crime. And no one has been charged.
Vincent Smothers,
That's correct.
admitted hitman, confessed that he did it, and that Devonte Sanford had no guilt whatsoever regarding these 4 murders. And again, our sympathies to the families who lost their loved ones. But it seems to speak of Bill, a former policeman yourself, either a lack of judgment or an unwillingness to go after the truth at some points.
What is infuriating about the Devonte Sanford case is that very quickly after he was sent to prison, a much more credible suspect, a 28-year-old man who had convinced the police by confession that he was responsible for killing 14 people as an assassin for hire, $5,000 a head. Vincent Smothers told them that. And they put together evidence that he provided them to essentially verify that he and his accomplice were in fact responsible for the murders that sent Devonte Sanford to prison. Now, you have that from a credible adult. He's laid out everything and sent you to evidence. But Kim Worthy let this child sit in an adult prison all those years, knowing exactly what she had, and she took no action to essentially bring justice to a child who had been swept off his feet by police officers who simply played a game to move him to prison. That's what happened here.
But here's unlike some wrongfully convicted people that are convicted because of false identification, for example, as I understand the facts, Devonte Sanford, he pled guilty. He did not get convicted by a jury. He went up there and said, I did it. And so I think that is a difference in this case that sets it apart from other cases.
No.
I think that's what Kim Worthy did.
No.
Did he plead guilty?
You have to understand the
But did he plead guilty, though?
after
I'm not saying it was right, but did he plead guilty?
No, you have to understand the context. Yes, he pled guilty. This is a 14-year-old kid. He was held, interrogated without representation, without an adult present to defend him or advocate for him. He was held for hours and hours, days, until he got to the point where, yeah, all right, I'll say whatever you want me to say. He's a 14-year-old kid.
True. Absolutely.
And
absolutely.
the literature is all over the place about the incidents of coerced confessions that happen on a daily basis in our criminal justice system. They seize on someone, they see him as an easy guy to charge with the crime, get him convicted, move on to the next case, get credit for the crime. I can't tell you how many times I've heard. I had a case several years ago. 2 law-abiding, upstanding women were charged with armed robbery. They knew that these women were not the ones who committed the crime, and yet when I took the officers, when I cross-examined him, when he testified, and I asked him, did you bother investigating the other tips you had gotten about who really committed this crime? He said, we didn't have to investigate. We had our suspect. So that is the mindset that goes into the unbelievably high number of people who get wrongfully convicted of crimes they didn't commit every year.
Well, let's talk about the number. How many people are we talking about? Not just across the country, but in Michigan alone.
If there are 2.3 million people in prison in the nation, we're looking at somewhere between 2 and 5% of them are very likely in prison for crimes they did not commit. Now, that's, I guess, a range that essentially has been established by the Innocence Project, and they have been watching this for 25 plus years. You have to understand this issue of wrongful conviction and how over the last 24 months or so, the nation has become much more attuned to the genuine possibility. Now, all of a sudden, looking backwards, we know that many, many egregious prosecutions have taken place. There are tens of thousands of people behind bars, and they can identify for us a good, strong line of reasons and arguments for actual innocence. So it's not a matter of, oh, gee, everybody in prison anymore says, I didn't do it. That's not the case.
And another serious problem that I think is that you've got to pay lawyers to represent defendants and give them the tools and the money they need to investigate a case. The police have a lot of resources. I'm not saying they do everything wrong, but you need a defense attorney. If my client said that he was coerced in a confession, I wouldn't let my client plead guilty. And I don't know the attorney that represented. It wasn't you. I know that.
No,
but to me, that's terrible.
I can tell you exactly who.
Well, I know, but I don't. I know who it was too. But
Well, we can say that he's now been disbarred.
okay, he's been disbarred. Well, then good though. But see, that's a problem in the system. A lawyer, a bad lawyer, that lets a client go up there and say, plead guilty, next case, done. And it is a problem because they don't get paid
We have
much.
a crisis. I mean, I think you're absolutely right. We have a crisis of horribly inadequate representation for indigent criminal defendants in this country. And if you don't have somebody who can adequately represent you going in, there's no protection for those people, and they end up convicted or pleading guilty to the crimes they didn't commit.
That's a problem.
The richer you are, the better lawyers you can afford, the better your defense. But I heard from Chief Craig, I think, something that is also very important, that he will expedite the process of getting the information that you need to exonerate your clients. I understand that before now, that was a problem, that it took sometimes months and years to even get a crack at the information needed, that you would have to file freedom of information requests.
It's a foot in the door, but until you can get prosecutors to come on board and participate and cooperate and do the right thing to seek justice and truth, the cops alone are not going to be able to accomplish that task.
What we heard from the chief today was very important for one key reason. There's another case that is in process at this point. A fellow named Lamar Munson essentially spent 21 years in prison for a murder that the forensic evidence demonstrates someone else committed. Now, I went to Chief Craig months ago and told him about this case, and essentially nothing happened from the police department until lawyers from the Innocence Clinic, University of Michigan Law School, showed up with enough evidence. Guess what? The evidence that we're talking about that essentially freed Lamar Munson, they had in their custody for all these years. And the bottom line is, we've identified the person by name. I went and found him in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, and they haven't moved to go and get that person to even question him yet. So I'm hoping that what the chief has said today turns into action. That's what is needed.
And at the front end, it's critical that the officers who fabricate the evidence, the officers who commit perjury during the preliminary exams, the officers who are responsible for all of these people being wrongfully convicted have to be held accountable.
Bottom line, well, it is a start, hopefully a true foundation for true justice. We thank you for being here.
Thank you.
All right.
For having us.
So now it's your turn to comment on this important topic. Charlie takes the show on the road when we return.
Yeah. Leave your thoughts and comments